Thank you, Shirley. Appreciate that. We're back in the land of the living today. We've been out bush these a few days this last week. It's cotton picking time, and we also always said to our daughter, our son-in-law, that when it's cotton picking, which is very labour intensive, when I retire, we'll come and give you a hand. So we've been expecting a call for the last few weeks, and it came Wednesday morning. We were out. Oh, come on out. So home, pack, lunch on the way out, and then we get stuck straight into it. So Anne has to prepare a meal for the family and workers. So 11 people, some eating around the table, some had to be put in containers, taken out to the workers, because you just keep working till the dew comes down. So that can be as late as midnight. I was sitting on the tractor with my daughter, just observing, and the Thursday morning with son-in-law getting lessons on how to drive this tractor. I've never driven a vehicle before with 16 gears. And that's just the forward ones. I know that's chicken feed to some of you who've driven heavy machinery, but for me, in my bicycle, Sturmey Archer, had 3 gears, I think. Some of you don't even know what I'm talking about. But anyway, it had at least a couple of reverse gears. I don't know, don't worry about the reverse. But rows of cotton 4 kilometres long, and learning how to go out to fuel the vehicles. Make sure the fuel goes in the right tank, because some of them have 3 tanks, and they get upset if the fuel goes in the wrong tank, apparently. Don't know why, it's bonus, I would have thought, but anyway, learning how to tie down the tarps with a special knot. Modules of cotton which they build, like a container, bigger shipping container, hold 10 tonnes of cotton, and so special tie downs for all of that. So I got my L plates on this tractor, and then I was just on my P's and it started to rain. And so we came home a bit early, but we're going out there again this week to sometime this week, because you can't pick cotton when it's wet, and plus the ground is too wet for the machinery to get on there. So once that dries out, we're out, and so I might pray for the cotton and the farmers out there letting me loose with the 16-geared tractor, and just think of how I could spin those wheels. No, it's not quite like that. You climb up a ladder into the tractor. It's at least air conditioned, so that's one of the pluses. Well, we're looking at this topic of anger today. I wasn't around when this was discussed, and so I did not choose this topic. Can just imagine it was Dave and Dylan who sat down and worked out all these topics in Proverbs, and they get this topic of anger. And you can just hear the conversation saying, "Oh, do you want to preach about anger?" "No." "What about you?" "No, I don't want to." Who could we get to preach about anger? Alan Grieve. "Oh no, he's just too kind to preach about anger." "What about later? Since he's retired, he's becoming a grumpy old man. He's the man." And so guess what? I ended up with this topic of anger. My understanding is that how it went, Dylan? Pretty close, yeah. If my understanding is correct, I reckon probably around about 100% of us struggle with anger from time to time. Would that be fairly accurate? And some people who say they don't ever get angry, you think, "Oh, I'm not sure about that," especially if they're married. If a couple who are married say they've never had a fight, I think, well, one of 2 things: either they're telling me fibs, or one of them is so much under the thumb that they're not game to disagree. In fact, years and years ago, I read a book on marriage, and this guy said that when people come to him, a couple come to him and ask him to marry them, one of the first questions he'd say is, "Have you had a fight yet?" And if they said no, he'd say, "Well, go away and have a fight and then come back and ask me to marry you." Because it's not so much the issue of having a fight, but it's the ability to work through it and to make up and to come out the other side. And so anger, I don't know what you think, but it just seems to me that in our society today, and this is just my view and observation, is I think our society is getting more and more angry. There's some big issues around at the moment which are a result or indicators of anger. A big one, of course, is domestic violence. Both parties, in the lead up to the election next week, or the end of this week, whatever, are talking about spending millions and millions of dollars to address this whole area of domestic violence. Exactly where it's going to be spent, how it's going to be spent, I don't know. They have people who are far more expert than I am in working out these things. It's too complex for me. But that is one of the issues. I guess another issue where we see anger is road rage. You think that too? Sometimes road rage really sort of, you hear about it, some of the things that happen. And I guess another area where we hear about anger is in this whole area of crime, and particularly youth crime, is where we're hearing a lot about it in society today. So there are three big areas, but of course we can get angry about a whole range of things, and you'll get angry about some things which I won't, and vice versa as well. And so it's important that we understand something about anger, but we are looking at this area of anger in the book of Proverbs. And we're getting close to the end of the thing on Proverbs, the series on Proverbs. And so I just want to do like a 3-minute or 2-minute recap of where Proverbs fits. You're aware that the Bible is not one book, but how many books? 66 books. And the 66 books are divided into two groups. It's divided into what? Old Testament and New Testament. In the New Testament there are how many books? 27, and in the Old Testament 39. And there's further breakdowns which take place, and the book of Proverbs sits right in the middle of a group of books which are called the wisdom books. So there are 5 books which are Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon. And so just very quickly is that Job, whole theme about Job is trusting God whatever. If you know the story of Job, lots of terrible things happen with him, but there's one verse which stands out to me, and it says this in Job 13:15. God might even kill me, but I have no other hope. Even though he slay me, yet I will hope in him. So no matter whatever happens, this book of wisdom, this wisdom book of Job, is saying to trust God. Then there's Psalms, which Psalms is worshipping God whatever. We only ever sing nice hymns and psalms, but there are some psalms which encourage God or asking God to break the teeth of my enemies. We didn't have any of those this morning, Jason. I'm not sure why we missed out on singing that one, because we don't have enemies like that where we'd want that to occur. But worshipping God whatever. And so, like Psalm 95:6, it could have had any one of a few hundred here, but come, let us worship and bow down. Let us kneel before the Lord our Maker. And then there's Proverbs, come back to, and Ecclesiastes is this whole book about living in the complex world. And a lot of the book of Proverbs saying, what's this life all about? And then right at the end, the writer says this, the conclusion, when all has been heard, is fear God and keep his commandments, because this applies to every person. For God will bring every act to judgment, whether everything which is hidden, whether it is good or evil. So in this complex world, obey God. And then there's this Song of Solomon. It's husband and wife relationships, but it's also human-God relationships, about loving God deeply. And Song of Solomon 2:16 says, my beloved is mine and I am his. Who remembers singing that chorus, my beloved is mine? I can see everybody who's over the age of old. It was in the brown book, wasn't it? Remember the brown book, then the blue book, then the yellow book. My beloved is mine and I am his, banner over me is love. But then this Proverbs, book of Proverbs is what we've been looking at, where it's this practical instruction for everyday living. If you want to make a real impact in society, two things you need is one is knowledge and the other is wisdom. You have knowledge, you have wisdom, you can stand head and shoulders above most people in society today. So Proverbs 1:7 says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. And Proverbs 9:10 says the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. So knowledge and wisdom coming together is this whole area of this is how we stand head and shoulders above most people. Knowledge and wisdom beginning or founded or grounded in the fear of the Lord. And we've looked at what that means previously. But today we're looking at this whole area of anger, and as you saw in the title, also forgiveness. But I'm going to spend like maybe 2 or 3 minutes on forgiveness, because I'm not sure why those two topics are together, because they can be quite separate. And I think forgiveness is a topic which can be handled like all on its own. It's a very deep and can be a very complex thing. So maybe Doug somewhere down the line might have us to do something like that. Now I need 3 volunteers, because I'm going to try to picture something what anger is like, and then I'm going to come back and have a look at these few statements up here. So I need about 3 volunteers. I was thinking Eli might be a good bloke to come on up. Can we unhook one of these chairs? You've got the easy part, Eli. Up here, thanks, mate. Eli can just sit there for a while, and you don't have to do anything, perhaps. It's just that when we're talking about anger, mostly anger is against somebody. And I'm not going to be angry with Eli. He's too nice to be angry about, but just to pretend. Now I need 2 more volunteers. Stephen, who do you think might be good? Why not? Both of you can come up. Both of you can come up. One on each end of the rope. No, don't need chairs. No, just on the other end. You can actually stay down here, Stephen, and just grab that end of the rope. You can grab that end of the rope too. I said you didn't have to do anything. What do you like at skipping? Just kidding. I'm not going to do skipping at all. Just hold it a bit tighter. What I want us to try to picture is this. Is that you know how sometimes we talk about anger, we have all sorts of patience, but then something happens which pushes us over the edge. You understand what I'm talking about? It's the straw that breaks the camel's back. It's something which I'm all right up until this time, but then something happens and I'm just pushed over the edge, and then I'm angry about something. And so this is what we're trying to picture. Here am I'm angry at Eli. Of course I'm not, but just for the purpose of it, it doesn't matter anyway. And so this is our cliff edge, as it were, or whatever. And what we think about when we're thinking about anger is that where this cliff edge varies with us from time to time, and depending what the issue is. So if you come back up here, guys, just bring the rope back up this way. So on some things, I have a very short fuse on. We're talking about road rage, and I'm not into road rage, but I tell you what, there are some things that some drivers do which really get under my skin. Is that happen for you too, or am I the only one? Especially, one of the things that gets me is that when cars scoot up the side and then cut in, things like that. And so if that happens too much for me, then I'm over the edge fairly quickly. But there are other things, like take it back the other way, right back down near there, where other things, even a bit further I reckon, there's other things in my life where the edge is a long way away. Oh, sorry about that. How I'm thinking of these musos that they leave their stuff everywhere. So, for example, like I mentioned domestic violence. Do Anne and I ever have a disagreement? We've been married like nearly 49 years this coming week, but yeah, sometimes we do have disagreements, but we have never ever got physical in anger towards one another. And so when it comes to things like that, I have a very long fuse. It's going to take a real lot to get me worked up to once where we have an argument, but also it pushes me over the edge. Now you're getting the picture of what I'm saying, is that for different ones of us, this being pushed over the edge, depending on what the issue is, can vary. For some we have a very long fuse, but for others, come up this way guys, but for others on some issues, we can have a very short fuse. It's not only what the issue is, it can also be my frame of mind as well. I am dead tired. How long or how short is my fuse? Would you agree? It's very short. You push me and I'm dead tired and you look at me sideways or whatever, I'm gonna really flare up. So if I'm tired, for some people when they're hungry, some people when they've had a really rough day, they've just been pushed. You know, if you've got kids and those kids sort of egg you on a bit, and so by the end of the day, if you kids do one more thing, and we're going to explode. But there can be other things as well, like adrenaline. Have you noticed about sportsmen and women that when the adrenaline is flowing, it doesn't take much for them to, well, we used to have the buffet, but that's been outlawed these days, and do other things. And so we have this whole area of where sometimes my fuse can be very short, but sometimes if I'm well rested and whatever, I can cope with things a whole lot easier. So depending on what the issue is, depending on my frame of mind, is going to demonstrate or going to result in how I'm going to express my anger. Now, there's one other thing I want to say, and just you guys can go and sit down now. You did a fantastic job, thank you. You could go too, Eli, thanks. Yeah. If I had a chocolate, I'd give it to you, but I don't. But there's one other thing. Remember, if Eli was still here, there's a line here, and there's a place in life where it's okay to be angry. Okay? Because not all anger is bad. I didn't count up. I'm depending upon others, and I thought, boy, it seems an awful lot. But the Bible talks about over 350 times about God being angry. When I first read that, I thought, that can't be right. Looked at a few other sources, they're saying much the same. So I'll take their word for it. So God can be angry but not sin. And so there is a place where there is this constant for God. And God's cliff, as it were, where it's pushing, is not going to move one way or the other, but it is there and it is rock solid. And so there is this encouragement to us in the Bible, and it comes out in several places and in Proverbs, where it says it's okay to be angry, but be angry about the right things in the right time and the right place. Be angry, but do not sin. And so not all anger is wrong, but let's be honest. A lot of the anger which you and I express is not a godly anger, which has to do with truth, righteousness and justice, but has more to say and to do about ourselves. And so, what's anger? Anger is this passionate response where a line, that's our line that we're talking about, whether appropriate or inappropriate is crossed. So it's appropriate when it's God's line. It's inappropriate when it's our line. And it's a passionate response. And when we think about it, just about everything I'm going to say today is going to be useless in the majority of times for you. Why is that? Because anger is a passion and it just sort of bursts out and rarely is it a considered response. Rarely do we say, oh, I think I might, well, will I or won't I get angry, and how will I express that? It just bursts out. That's the passion of it. And so anger can be that, is this passion, is this passionate response where it's either appropriate or inappropriate. Also need to acknowledge that anger is a God-given emotion. So it's something which God has given us, and we need to acknowledge that. The Bible mentions God's anger. Anger is powerful, and it can be used or abused. That's like a lot of things. If we can use anger in the right way, it can spur us on in promoting truth, righteousness and justice. The Bible says, Ephesians 4:26, be angry but do not sin. And so there's this idea of this stages of anger. These are my stages. They probably add other things into it, where it's irritation to frustration, to anger, to rage or retreat, and wrath. Anger is not always an outward expression of bursting out. Sometimes it can be rage, but sometimes it can be retreat as well. I'm angry and I withdraw. Husbands and wives can do that sort of thing, but it's not only there. It can happen in other places as well. I can't remember who it was. It was in a cricket match years ago against Australia. I think it was either Pakistan or India, where they were in the field and they got upset with the Australians, got so upset with decisions which were being made and whatever. The captain got the team and they walked off the field. Some of you might remember that. And so there's no punching or throwing, whatever, but there was this whole area of withdrawing. And so that can also happen in that way as well, which can also happen in the workplace, other places as well, where we withdraw. And the wrath is, the Bible talks about wrath in such a way as that wrath is an anger which is sustained and ongoing for an extended period of time. I might get angry with Eli and we'll sort it out, and that's over and done with. But if there's a wrath there, then it's going to last, it's going to eat away, and it's going to do whatever I can. It's going to go on and on and on. So the question is, at what stage does sin occur if it's a not righteous sort of anger? And we're going to have a look at that in a while as well. It's also, we're talking about our own anger, but also Proverbs 15:1 also talks about and says that but a harsh word can stir up anger. So we are not going to dwell too much on this. We're going to talk about my anger so much, or more so today. But we also want to acknowledge that there can be something about me where I can provoke others to anger as well. And so we need to be aware of that, and just to focus on that for a while. What is it that I do in my life that make others, particularly those close to me, what is it that I do in my life that can make others angry? A colleague of mine a few years ago did this course about dealing with difficult people. So the whole course is how do you deal with difficult people? And he tells me that the opening exercise was this: what is it about you that makes you a difficult person? Now that is a searching type of a question to ask. What is it about you? What is it about me, about my nature, about my character, about the words that I use, the actions I take, whatever, that I can make others angry? And we need to consider that as part of all of this. So when we're looking at anger, we're going to have to move very, very quickly through all of this. Is that we are going to be looking at a few things about anger very quickly. We're going to be looking at 5 different things when we're looking at anger. Looking around, looking back, looking ahead, and looking up. So the first one we want to have a look at is this whole idea of looking around. Are you of the idea that, or inclined that when things go wrong, that's not your fault, that's always someone else, and it's always somebody else to blame? And this is what the looking around is all about, is that sometimes when I'm angry, is that we need to sometimes our tendency is to blame others. You, or what you have done or what you have said has made me angry. And we need to remember I'm angry because I am angry. That's been my response. I'm responsible for my anger. So Proverbs 14 and verse 17 says, short-tempered people do foolish things. And so there can be this whole area of blaming others. Can I say this too, is that when we are engaged in this anger relationship or response, whatever you want to call it, reaction, is that when we're wanting to address it, always remember this, is to focus on the issue, not on the person. And that's particularly helpful or particularly necessary for husbands and wives, is that when you have a disagreement, remember that it is not husband versus wife and wife versus husband, but husband and wife together against the issue. And together we will address the issue and we'll focus on the issue and say, how will we address this issue together? If you're able to do that, you're well on the way to a good, long, successful and happy marriage. But it's not only in that circumstance, but in every circumstance, we need to not put the blame out there, but to accept responsibility for my own action. And then when I am wanting to deal with it, don't focus on the other person and say, what a dirty, rotten, whatever you are, but what is the issue and how do we address the issue? So looking at anger, looking around. Secondly, we want to be looking in. When looking in at my anger. So Proverbs 29:22 says this, an angry person starts a fight, a hot-tempered person commits all kinds of sin. So to be aware of that I'm responsible for this, and why am I angry? Remember that continuum that I said about from irritation through to wrath? And I said, what is it, at what point does this become sinful? Matthew 5:22 has some disturbing words for us. But it says this, but I tell you, Jesus said this, but I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. So right at the beginning, and if you read that in context, all that Jesus is saying there in that part of the Sermon on the Mount is this, is that it's not so much the outward act which God is looking at, but he's looking at the inner, the motivation of what happens. Where does it start? And Jesus is saying here, is saying in Matthew 5, right at the beginning, at the core, at the centre, the motivation. When that is there, the motivation is wrong, that's when the sin occurs, not when just in the outward expression of it. So it's helpful for us to be thinking about, looking at anger, what is it that makes me angry and why? What are the times when I've got angry? And you can't do this in the moment, heat of the moment, but somewhere it's calm, just to pull aside and to say, look back over your life and say, when I've been angry, what are some times I've been angry? And is there a common thread through there that keeps coming up? And when this occurs, then this makes me angry. Let me suggest that one of the most common ones is the area of control. Is that when I lose control of a situation, then I'm going to be angry. And we like to be in control. Had a colleague once who was very hamstrung in his relationships because his sense of control, to the point where I had to call him in and to address this issue of control. And actually had to send him off to some specialist help, some counsel to deal with his control. Why is he this controlling person? And then when I pointed this out about it, his answer to control was to control his control. You see, it just didn't work that way. Had to get to the heart of the matter, to the seat of what is this all about, and to deal with that and to relax in that. So what is the need for you to control? What's the need for you to control your spouse? What's the need for you to control your kids? I mean, sometimes, especially with kids, it's responsible parenting to a degree. But what is it in a relationship with a work colleague or whoever in the church, a ministry colleague, where we sense this need to control? Remember what Jesus said, or what Paul said in Philippians about Jesus, that he emptied himself, made himself of no reputation, that if ever there was somebody who could be in control, he's happy to relax and leave it all to the Father. So what is it that makes me angry? Why? And then how do I react or respond to that? So looking at anger, looking around, looking back, looking in, looking back. What do I notice and learn from the past? When you've been angry, how have you responded? What can you learn from that? You know, one of the things is that we can sometimes express anger because we don't know how to express our emotions and feelings correctly. And often that's been the case because the models which we've been exposed to have been not good models. So we've had an angry father or an angry mother and who haven't handled situations too well. And their controlling things was to express anger. That's all I've known. And so when it comes to me, when I'm in a situation, I don't know how to deal with that other than to get angry. And so sometimes in looking back, we can say, what models have I been exposed to? And sometimes it's a case of unlearning wrong models and having to relearn right models. So we've been looking around, looking in, looking back, and looking ahead. This is an important one for us, as they all are. What is the outcome of my anger? Proverbs 14:29 says, people with understanding control their anger, and a hot temper shows great foolishness. If I get angry, what's the outcome of this going to be? Proverbs 15:18, a hot-tempered person starts a fight. A cool-tempered person stops them. Proverbs 29:22 says, an angry person starts fights, a hot-tempered person commits all kinds of sin. You see the repetition that's coming through in those three different proverbs there, is that we need to consider what's the outcome of my anger. So if I can address my issues with Eli appropriately, we say, this is the issue, let's deal with that, sort it out, that's fine. But what if I get angry with him? Then we've taken our eyes off the issue and we've damaged a relationship. And sometimes I can say things or do things to a person, or say things about a person, and once something is said, man, it's impossible to unsay them. Because especially if they're difficult things that we've said, wrong things, even though the person might forgive in their mind as they keep hearing the things that have been said. But the last one is the important one, is that we need to be looking up as well. We need to just acknowledge this one and to say, be angry at what makes God angry. So that's important. Be angry at what makes God angry, but we also just need to be thinking about some of the things about my wrong anger. One thing we need to ask ourselves is that if we have anger, are we willing to change? Some people don't want to change, but they find security and they're happy in their anger. But most people, I think, would be willing to change. But if you aren't willing to change about your anger, are you willing to be made willing? Is an important step to make. Another thing I'd say is this: is that if you're in a relationship or in a situation where your anger is really out of control, then you really do need to seek help. It is more than likely something that you cannot deal with on your own. You know, we've talked about all sorts of anger, about domestic violence and road rage and other things that make us angry. Can I say this? I do not know of anybody in our church who has an anger issue. But let's not be surprised if there are people in our church with anger issues. Because I'm not aware of anybody, I feel free to say whatever because I'm not pointing the finger at any individual here. But if anger is an issue in any of these areas or just in the whole of your life, then it is highly unlikely that you on your own are going to be able to deal with it. And it's important that you do seek help from someone else. Now that might be the person who's discipling you. It might just be an irritation. Say, look, I just get irritable and just want to deal with that. Will you help me in all of that? Or it might be somewhere down the scale a bit further where it is such a serious nature where you need professional help. Then I encourage, I urge you, I plead with you that if you're in that situation, that you actually seek help. The office has a list of Christian counsellors, psychologists, therapists, who, if you contact the office, they'll be able to give you that list. Or through the pastors, they'll be able to give you a contact of somebody who'll help you to discover why is it that anger is an issue for you. Also, I want to remember this, for you to remember this, is that God is in the people-changing business. What business are you in? Well, you could be in any sort of business, but God is in the people-changing business, in reconciling people to himself and then not only reconciling but transforming people. Said before about an incident years ago where I was called into a church to deal with a fight, and one of the men stood up and said, we're Germans here, and this is what us Germans are like, is that we like to have a good fight and to be angry. And as a young person then stood up with all the courage I could muster, said, half my blood is German blood. But the moment I gave my life to Jesus, all that excuse was done away with because the Holy Spirit came in and dwelt me and wants to do this transforming work in my life. And so if today you're saying, that's just me, I'm an angry person, rubbish. You may be an angry person, but that's no reason for you to stay that way. Because God is in the people-changing business and he wants to do this transforming work in your life, either directly or through other people in whatever way possible. So there's hope for the way ahead as well. And there will be times when we relapse. All of us, roughly 100% of us, will still get angry. The old nature sort of still stirs up a bit, and so that happens. We get angry. So what do we do then? Confess, I'm angry. We repent. We count on God. And if it's towards someone else, we ask forgiveness as well. So that's anger. Does that give you some things to think about, to work through? And remember, the topic is not just about anger, but about forgiveness. I just want to share one verse about forgiveness from Proverbs, and then one very brief story, and I'm through. And the one verse is from Proverbs 17:9. Love prospers when a fault is forgiven. Love prospers when a fault is forgiven, but dwelling on it separates close friends. That's a sermon in itself, don't you think? And we need to be thinking about that. Years and years ago, I was talking with a woman. None of you would know her, as far as I know, not connected with the church, not even in this area. But at that particular stage, she said to me that she'd been married 30-something years. And she said, in this whole 30 years, and with this tone of pride in her life, in her tone of voice, she said, in all these 30-something years of marriage, I have never once apologised to my husband. So sad that you've never apologised, you've never asked forgiveness. That's a recipe for disaster that separates close friends. The fact that the husband has stayed there for that many years is a testimony to something in all of that. Folk, if you were like that today, that you've never apologised and never said sorry to your spouse, or to your parents or to your kids, then go home and I urge you to say sorry for not saying sorry. Okay? Say sorry for not saying sorry. Because none of us, whether it be me or you or whoever you relate to, none of us are perfect. And especially to marriage, perhaps the most common phrase we ought to be saying is, I love you. But somewhere up there with this whole group of other things we ought to be saying regularly to each other is what? I was wrong, I'm sorry. Well, if you didn't get anything out of anger, maybe out of forgiveness and saying sorry. Let's pray. Apologies to the music team for disrupting everything. Hope you can find your stands and whatever else, and don't trip over the rope. Father, you looked at sin and you got you angry. So angry that out of love, the Bible tells us you love the world so much that you sent your only Son to deal with the sin. Not focusing on us as people, but on the issue of sin. To offer us forgiveness that we might become your children, your sons and your daughters. And we're so glad that we are your children today. As your children, we also acknowledge that we sit together with brothers and sisters who sometimes rub us up the wrong way. And sometimes that's in the family, sometimes in the church family, sometimes at work or in our neighbourhood, school, work, wherever. But Lord, help us to be people who are seeking to be more and more like the Lord Jesus, who pictured for us in such a perfect way of being angry but sinning not. So help us to live that life. Help us to live lives ready to forgive others when they seek it, and to live in peace and harmony with those round about us, to bring glory and honour to you, our risen Lord Jesus. Amen.